It's open now.
Okay.
You can speak to us, Elder George.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. I'm having some challenges with my audio, but I hope you can clearly hear me now. I want to greet everyone in the name of Jesus, and thank you so much for this opportunity that we have had once again to share the word of God. I am going to just adjust my sharing here so that you can see my whole screen clearly. I hope I have shared. If not, you will notify me. The last time we were together, we were looking at Daniel chapter 11, where we were looking at the foundations of the prophecies that leads to verse 30, because we said our aim or our target is to get to verse 30 and up to 36. We realize that the spirit of prophecy says the sins or the fulfillment that took place of the prophecies of verse 30 to 36 is going to be repeated during our time. And we know that our time or the time that is soon to come, we're going to have a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 to 45, and then Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. So because of that, it's important to learn from what the SOP says and from what God prophesied or foretold and forewarned and forearmed us of what is to come. Hence, we're looking at Daniel chapter 11 from verse 1. Why? Because for us to understand verses 40 to 45, we need to really go back and understand verses 30 to 36. And for us to understand verses 30 to 36, how we come to have the King of the North in verse 30, we need to understand verse 1 to 30. So that is what we were doing the last time that we met. And if you have forgotten, don't worry. I'm going to give a recap today so that we can be together. It is my hope that you still remember what we learned, but I'm going to go over it and remind you of what we looked at. So we looked at this quotation as one of our key quotations. I think after some time, after the first week, it must be the second week, we then looked at this quotation after going through Daniel chapter 10. It reads and says, "We have no time to lose. Troublous times are before us. The world is stirred with the spirit of war." Important details, but we don't have time for them now. But I think if you remember, as we're looking at Daniel chapter 11, this must make sense. The world is stirred with the spirit of war. Soon the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. The prophecy, let me bring my cursor here so that you can follow where I am reading because it's important. So here is my cursor. It says, soon the sins of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. So the sins of trouble that were spoken of in the prophecies are to take place soon. So says the SOP. We're reading from Manuscript Releases, Volume 13, page 394, paragraph number 1. The prophecy, following my cursor, the prophecy in the 11th, excuse me, the prophecy in the 11th of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Very important detail. It's a very long prophecy from verse 1 up to verse 45, 45 verses. But Ellen White here is saying it has reached its complete fulfillment. Of note is the fact that all prophecies or the greater portion of this prophecy has been fulfilled to an extent that it's about to reach its complete fulfillment. Hence, it's of interest of us to note what has been fulfilled. And we have seen a portion of that, and then we're going to see a portion of that this week. And then later on at the end of the week and onwards, we're going to see how it's going to then be completely fulfilled during our time. It says, the prophecy, the 11th of Daniel, has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Much of the history I'm just trying to remember if I shared I noted I had not shared my video. Sorry for that. Back to the quotation. The prophecy in the 11th of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Much of the history that has taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated. In other words, what we are soon to experience will be similar to what took place in fulfilling the fulfilled portion of Daniel chapter 11. Much of the history that has taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated. In the 30th verse, a power is spoken of that shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. She then quotes Daniel chapter 11 from verse 30 east to 36. And then continuing the quotation, it says, scenes similar to those described in these words will take place. In which words? That is in Daniel chapter 11, verse 30 to 36. So the scenes similar to the ones described that are going to be repeated are the scenes outlined in verse 30 to verse 36. So scenes similar to those described in these words will take place. We see evidence that Satan is first obtaining the control of human minds. We have not the fear of God before them. Let all who read and understand the prophecies of this book, let all read, pardon me for that, let all read and understand the prophecies of this book, for we are now entering upon the time of trouble spoken of. And then she quotes Daniel chapter 12 from verse 1 to verse 4. So this is where we got to this point in our previous studies from Daniel chapter 10 onwards, and then I'm going to recap what we looked at as far as the structure that is being outlined by the SOP here. So just by a way of repetition, basically, she's saying Daniel chapter 11 has been fulfilled historically. We have seen it, and we're going to see it again this week. And she said the unfulfilled portion is about to be fulfilled. She says these sins that took place of Daniel chapter 11 is about to reach its complete fulfillment. And then she quotes Daniel chapter 11 verses 30 to 36 and says, Daniel chapter 11 verse 30 to 36 has already been fulfilled. So we're going to see this week how this was fulfilled. And then she says the sins similar to those that fulfilled this chapter are going to be repeated, which means that Daniel chapter 11 from verse 40 onwards is going to be fulfilled in a similar fashion that Daniel chapter 11 verse 30.
I don't know, George, was always me alone. You can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
We can hear you, but it's very low, Elder.
Can you hear me now, Elder?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Goodness, I hope, please let me know if I manage to drop, because I'm having problems with my audio. So the headphones I'm using are helping out, but it seems they are also dropping the signal here and there. All right, so thank you for that. Just remind me in case I keep on going and you can't hear me. So I was saying the structure that we are given by the spirit of prophecy is much of the history of Daniel chapter 11 has been fulfilled, and part of that history, much of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11 has been fulfilled. And part of that prophecy that has been fulfilled is verse 30 to verse 36. So Daniel chapter 11, verse 30 to 36 has already been fulfilled. We shall see how this week. She then says, the sins that took place in fulfilling that prophecy are going to be repeated. Not necessarily exactly, but we are going to see sins that are in similar fashion to the ones that fulfilled verse 30 to 36 in our time. In other words, Daniel chapter 11 from verse 40 onwards, which is yet to be fulfilled, is going to be fulfilled by sins that are similar in fashion to those that fulfilled verse 30 is to 36. So our aim this week is to get to verse 30 to 36 and see how verse 30 to 36 was fulfilled and what sins fulfilled this portion of Daniel chapter 11. And then we're going to have an idea and be able to have more light in interpreting chapter 40, verse 40 onwards. So our aim through these sessions that we're going to have this week and next week is to understand verse 30 to 36 and have that help us understand verse 40 of Daniel chapter 11 to verse 45, and then Daniel chapter 12 verse 1 and verse 3, which is a portion of prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled. Now, like we said before, in order for us to understand verse 30 to 36, we need to understand who the king of the north is and who the king of the south is. Because from Daniel chapter 11, verse 30 to the end of the chapter, it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south. To understand who the king of the north and who the king of the south is, we had to go back to Daniel chapter 11, and we did study from verse 1. So I'm going to have a quick recap of that now for those who are joining us for the first time, who did not join us previously, and also just to remind even those that we were with in our previous chapters, to say, how do we connect Daniel chapter 11 verse 30 to Daniel chapter 11 verse 1? Who is the king of the north and who is the king of the south? What are the foundations of these prophecies? And that foundation is going to help us understand the prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled, that is going to be fulfilled in our time. So just to remind you of the prophecies of Daniel, it could be Daniel chapter 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. We remember even in Daniel chapter 9, we were introduced to the 2300-day prophecy, which the angel came to explain in the time of Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede was the one ruling the Medo-Persian kingdom, that is from 538 to 537. So remember, we have Babylon. After Babylon came Medo-Persia. So when the transition took place after the kingdom of Babylon, so for those who are hearing this for the first time again, if you read the prophecies of Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, you are going to note that God gave these prophecies, and in interpreting the prophecies, the angel that came with the interpretation from God made it clear that the first kingdom in Daniel chapter 2, it could be that of the mineral or the head of gold. In Daniel chapter 7, it would be the lion beast. The first kingdom is the kingdom of Babylon. And then the kingdom that followed was the kingdom of Medo-Persia, as outlined in the interpretation of Daniel chapter 8. And then after Medo-Persia came Greece. So the most popular king of the kingdom of Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar. After Babylon came a new kingdom, which is Medo-Persia. And when Medo-Persia came, Darius was the first ruler of that kingdom. After Darius, after his death, Cyrus took over in 538, as we can see outlined here. After 537, when Cyrus died in 530, his son Cambyses took over. And then after his son came the false Simedis. He's called the false Simedis because he claimed to be the brother of Cambyses, but he was not. And then a distant cousin came and took over, who was Darius. Now, This is going to be important for us in introducing Daniel chapter 11 as we recap for those who are seeing this for the first time, just to have an idea of how these kings came to be will help you understand as we try to recap what we did. So Darius the Mede was the first king. When he died, Cyrus took over. After Cyrus died in 530 BC. When he died, his son took over, who was Cambyses. And when his son took over, when he was fighting the Egyptians in Egypt, someone who claimed to be his brother, who's known now as the false Semites, took over in 522. And when he was on his way to reclaim his throne, Cambyses died. And then this false Semites ruled for about 6 months or so. Then a distant cousin of Cambyses then took over, whose name was Darius the first. He took over from 522 BC right up to 486, quite a long period of peace in Medo-Persia. So this is how the kings came to be and how the Medo-Persian kingdom was ruled from Darius onwards. Now, just a glimpse of what we looked at. If you read Prophets and Kings, page 572, referring to the false Semites, it says, during the reign of Cambyses, the work on the temple progressed slowly, and during the reign of the false Semites, also called Artaxerxes, in Ezra chapter 4, verse 7. So you just know that the king referred to as Artaxerxes in Ezra chapter 4 is this false brother of Cambyses, as we find here in Prophets and Kings. Then when it comes to Darius, who took over from this false Semites, we find him in Haggai and in Zechariah. Haggai 1 verse 1 says, in the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet. So this was in 520 BC. That is when the word of the Lord came to Haggai, and it is in August when Darius was the king. Zechariah 1 verse 1 also begins by saying, in the 8th month, in the second year of Darius, came the word of the Lord unto Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. So that was in the same year in 520 BC. In December, that is when the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, also during the time of Darius. After Darius the Mede came Xerxes. Xerxes is the king who was ruling during the time of Esther. If we read Esther 1 verse 1, it says, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is the Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 107 provinces. Prophets and Kings, page 592, paragraph number 2 says, the Lord foresaw the troublous times that were to follow during the reign of Xerxes, the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther. So this Xerxes is the one who took over after Darius. I'm deliberately going over this because this is important for Daniel chapter 11 from verses 3 onwards. So you find that after Darius came Xerxes, after Xerxes came Artaxerxes. So Artaxerxes 1, we know him. Why? Because he is the one who gave the decree that allowed the Israelites to go back to restore Jerusalem as a nation and to rebuild the walls, and then thereby also rebuilding their temple. We find that decree in Ezra chapter 7, from verse 7. It reads, and there went up some of the children of Israel in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. Artaxerxes the king, king of kings, unto Ezra the priest, ascribed unto the law of God of heaven perfect peace at such a time. Verse 13, I make a decree that all they of the people of Israel and of his priests and Levites in my realm, which are minded of their own free will to go up to Jerusalem. So this is the outline of kings. So the first one is Cyrus. Why Cyrus? Because during the time of this prophecy begins in Daniel chapter 10, when the angel Gabriel came to answer Daniel, who was fasting for 3 weeks. And Daniel chapter 10 begins by saying it was in the 3rd year of King Cyrus. So we have King Cyrus in 537. After Cyrus, we saw Cambyses. After Cambyses, the false Semites. The false Semites, then came Darius. We saw the books of Haggai and Zechariah being written in the book of Darius. We saw Esther chapter I'm getting some feedback from someone who's not muting. Then we saw the four Semites in Ezra chapter 4. And then after Darius came Xerxes. This is the king who got married, or who married Esther. The Queen Esther was queen because she was married to King Xerxes, who came after Darius. And then after King Xerxes came Artaxerxes, who ruled from 467 to 423. And we know that the decree to rebuild Jerusalem was given in 457 BC. So you can tell from this timeline that this is the king that was referred to. So this is the outline which we are going to see again in Daniel chapter 11. With this background, as we continue with this recap, let's quickly go to Daniel chapter 11, and we read it as follows. So we saw the vision starts in Daniel chapter 10 and it ends in Daniel chapter 12. So in Daniel chapter 10, it says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto me. Then Daniel outlines how it happens, how it happened. He was praying for 3 weeks. Then Gabriel came and said, do not worry. From the moment you started to pray, I was given a command to come and give you an answer. Then the prince of Persia, he had to was quite an obstacle because I could not come because of him until Michael came to my assistance. Now I have come to give you understanding. So that is the whole of Daniel chapter 10. Then he starts from verse 1 of the chapter 11 to outline the prophecy. So in verse 1, it reads and says, also in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Verse 2, and now I will show thee the truth. He begins, the angel Gabriel begins to outline the prophecy. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Okay, let's take that verse again now with understanding. Now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand yet 3 kings in Persia. So during this time, it was the time of the king of Cyrus, during the time of the vision. As Daniel was having a conversation with this angel in vision, it was in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Okay, so during this time, on this day when Gabriel was talking to Daniel, it was in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Then Gabriel says, the angel, to Daniel, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. In other words, 3 kings are going to come. Okay, so after Cyrus, 3 kings are going to come. Which 3 kings did we see? That is, after Cyrus came Cambyses, after Cambyses, the 4 Semites, after the 4 Semites came Darius. Okay, so these are the 3 kings which followed. Then it says, the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And who is this one? The 4th was Xerxes. So just to bring up the kings again, as we read the verse on top there. So 3 kings are yet to come: Cambyses, the 4 Semites, and Darius. So these are the 3 kings which came after Cyrus. They had not come when this prophecy was being given to Daniel. Okay, by the time they came, of course, Daniel was already dead, but thank God we had the prophecy. So Cambyses, the 4 Semites, and Darius, 3 kings. Then the 4th was Xerxes, and Xerxes is said to be richer, and indeed Xerxes was the richest king after Cyrus, and he reigned from 486 to 465 BC. Now, there are other kings which came after. Okay, they are said to be minor kings because there is nothing much of importance which happened during their reign. They are not even really mentioned as much in history nor in the Bible. But there are 9 kings which followed after Xerxes, and then after that, these 9 kings came Alexander the Great. That is when Greece was. That is when Medo-Persia was defeated by Greece. Now, however, the mention of Greece takes place during this time. If we read Daniel chapter 11, verse 2 again, it says, and now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be richer than they all. Then the last part says, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So in other words, the fourth king, number one, is going to be rich, and because of his strength, that is of course the power of his chariots and his army, he is the one that was going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So he is the one who provoked Greece, the kingdom which later defeated Medo-Persia 9 kings later. How did that happen? We saw that Xerxes led the forces of Medo-Persia against Greece, and there are two main battles that are of importance or that are more popular if you read in history: the Battle of Thermopylae and of course the Battle of Plataea. It says here, if we're to reading about Thermopylae, it says this battle took place in August or September of 480 BCE. It is famous for the stand of a small Greek force led by King Leonidas of Sparta against the much larger Persian army led by King Xerxes I. Then the following battle, Xerxes' forces suffered in one day a double defeat at Plataea and at the promontory of Mycale on the coast of Asia Minor. The Persians left Greece and limited their rule henceforth in the Asian mainland. Now, the verse says, he stirred up Greece. History records these as the two most famous battles during this period. Why? It is the strength or the confidence that the Grecians gathered because they managed to withstand the forces that had been deployed by Xerxes. Hence, it planted in Greece the idea that Medo-Persia can be defeated. Hence, from then onwards, all the army commanders and the leaders or the kings of Greece that came was preparing for that final battle when Greece was going to be able to stand against the whole entire Medo-Persian realm. So this is how Xerxes stirred up or provoked Greece, as we saw in this verse. So that was Daniel chapter 11, verse 2. Verse 3 says, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion, which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. Now, very interesting details here. Nothing that we don't know from Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8. A mighty king shall stand up. We know that after the kingdom of Medo-Persia came the kingdom of Greece. And in particular, Alexander the Great, who was leading Greece. So that is verse 3. He shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. We know all about Alexander the Great, how swift he was, and how a good general he was, and how undefeated he was till to his death. Now, verse 4 is very interesting. It really gives a picture of how Daniel chapter 11 is different. One of the things that differentiates Daniel chapter 11 from all the other three prophecies, that is Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9, which is also part of chapter 8. It says in verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven. We already know this. Why? In Daniel chapter 7, we know that the leopard kingdom had 4 heads, which meant that this kingdom was going to be divided into 4. In Daniel chapter 8, we also saw that where on that little horn, it was broken, and before it came 4 horns. So we have this detail from Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8. But Daniel chapter 11 goes on to specifics and says, as we read here following my cursor, it says, and shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So it's very specific, even to the minute details of how things were going to happen. Number one, the kingdom of Greece was going to be ruled by a very formidable and powerful king, that is Alexander the Great. Then and then his kingdom shall be broken. Of course, after his death, it was going to be divided amongst 4 generals. But it says, not to his posterity. In other words, it was not going to be his son who was going to rule. And according to history, he tried to rule as a puppet king to these generals for some time, but it was only for a few years. He failed. Eventually, only 4 kings, after a lot of battles, emerged, which were not even related to Alexander the Great. So it says, the prophet says, not according to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. These kings were never as good, or these generals were never as good as Alexander the Great was. They were never as swift as he was. So the glory of the kingdom was never to be, for the kingdom shall be plucked up even for others besides those. That's a long-term fulfillment that we shall see in Daniel chapter 11 altogether. So you will notice that Daniel chapter 11 goes in deep into details, as you saw in our previous study, and as we shall have a glimpse even this week. It details all the battles that took place, even the intermarriages that happened between the king of the north and the king of the south. It has more detail than all the other 3 prophecies that we saw. That is Daniel chapter 2, chapter 11, chapter 7, and chapter 8. That is one of the things that it is different from, which will be interesting, especially when we consider Daniel chapter 11 from verses 40 onwards. So now we have seen from Daniel chapter 2, it was the kingdom of Medo-Persia. After Medo-Persia, Daniel chapter 11, verse 3 and 4 now introduces the kingdom of Greece, and then now verse 4 introduces the 4 generals which ruled thereby after. So it says, it shall be divided to the 4 winds of heaven, and that is to say, the 4 kingdoms which were ruled by 4 generals, that is Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus. We saw this and how they ruled in our previous study. So basically, this is the picture that we saw again. So Ptolemy ruled in the south. This is Egypt, okay, and then this is Syria, which was the headquarters of the Seleucid kingdom, which was ruled by Seleucus, and then we had Lysimachus and Cassander, and in between here, between Syria and Egypt, this is where Israel was. Okay, so basically the kingdom of Israel or Judea was sandwiched between Syria and Egypt, where Ptolemy was ruling. And we know that in the passage of time, what happened was, as we shall see in verse 4 soon, basically the kingdom was eventually divided into 2 instead of 4. Seleucus took over the kingdoms of Lysimachus and Cassander. So basically we were left with the Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom. Seleucus ruled in the north of Israel, and Ptolemy ruled in the south of Israel. And these 2 kingdoms remained, because these remained as the 2 powerful generals. So we had Seleucus in the north and Ptolemy in the south. They ruled for quite some time. Actually, their sons and their posterity took over in such a way that this kingdom later on was called the Seleucid kingdom, because it belonged to the Seleucid dynasty after the name Seleucus, because his posterity took over. Same applies when it comes to Egypt. Ptolemy ruled, and his posterity, that is to say, after him, his son took over. After his son, his other son, his son, his son, his son, his son, and it went on for years, such that it became, and it is now known as the Ptolemaic kingdom, which was in history. So we only remained with the 2 kingdoms, the king in the south and the king in the north. That is the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. How were they the northern and the southern kingdom? They were the northern and southern kingdom because the Ptolemaic kingdom was south of Israel or south of the land of Judea, whilst the that is the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was north of Palestine or north of Israel. So this terminology is given to us in Daniel chapter 11. Let's go on with our verses to see this. So verse 4, just to read with understanding now. Verse 4 says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his kingdom which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. That is verse 4. Verse 5 then introduces the southern kingdom as one of the kings. Verse 5 says, and the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So the king of the south was the Ptolemaic kingdom, and then the king of the north was, of course, the Seleucid kingdom. So whoever was ruling the northern kingdom was the king of the north, and whoever was ruling the southern kingdom was the king of the south at that particular moment. And at this time, it was Ptolemy I in the south, so he was the king of the south at this particular moment in verse 5. And then in the northern kingdom, it was Seleucus, so he was the king of the north. So we continued to trace these wars in our previous study together from verse 6 way up to verse 16. It's an interesting thing to go over. You can check our recorded videos on the YouTube, where we saw the intermarriages that happened between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and how they cheated each other in those marriages, and how they killed each other, and how the leadership moved from one end to the other, and all that. It was all prophesied in detail in Daniel chapter 11. And it's interesting to see how it was fulfilled exactly in that manner. So we're not going to look at that, but basically this is the summary. Where we want to end at today is to look at the last verses, which leads to where we ended last time. That is verse 16. So to get verse 16, let's pick it up from verse 14. It reads, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mound, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. For those who remember, this is when the king, the southern kingdom, had a very young king, and the northern kingdom was taking advantage of that, and there was a power which was new, which helped at this particular moment the king of the south, or Egypt, and that power was Rome. Verse 16 said, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand he shall be consumed. So this is where we ended, and this is where our recap is going to end. And then tomorrow onwards, we take it from here. So where did we land last time? We were on verse 16. So the king of the north was taking advantage of the king of the south. Remember, south is Egypt. Okay, so the Ptolemaic kingdom was the kingdom of Egypt, and all the surrounding nations which were under Ptolemy, or the kings of the Ptolemaic kingdom. So in Egypt there was a young ruler, and the king of the north was taking advantage of this young ruler, and they actually had planned to come and take over the kingdom of the south completely, so that the king of the north, or the Seleucid kingdom, was going to be the king and overruling kingdom of the whole world. As they were planning to do that, to take over the kingdom of the south, that is to take over the Ptolemaic kingdom, or Egypt, It was at that particular point when another power, which was slowly rising from time to time, then came and rescued Egypt or challenged the northern kingdom. And that power was the power or the kingdom of Rome. So to summarize how things happened, in 192 BC, Rome declared war on the northern kingdom, okay? And of course, there were some battles that were fought and all that. And after those battles, basically the northern kingdom was relegated. Its power was only limited only to Syria after the battles that took place. And then in 168 BC, we saw, because of Pompey, who was the army general and the administrator on behalf of Rome of the whole Mediterranean area, he then restricted not only the power of the Seleucid kingdom to Syria, but he took over every other land, and Syria became only but a province in Rome, or a province of Rome. That was in 168 BC. So we saw that from 168 BC onwards, Rome became the power that was dominating the entire landscape or in the entire world. Okay. Then in 65 BC, Pompey and his armies went and fought with the kingdom of Syria, which was the Ptolemaic, the Seleucid kingdom. And when he fought and took over everything, even the administrative powers, then Ptolemy took over even not Ptolemy, Pompey, or the Romans took over even the governorship of Syria. When Pompey took over the governorship of Syria, he then to Israel became the king of the north. So let me say again more smoothly this time around by way of recap. 192, Rome declares war on the king of the north, or on the Seleucid kingdom, okay? And then after some battles and some going back and forth and all the details that we looked at, basically Rome was respected after that war as a power, and the Seleucid kingdom was restricted only to the nations that it ruled, and Rome was no longer under its influence. From 168 BC onwards. Why? In 168, actually the powers of the Seleucid kingdom were limited only to Syria, and all the other kingdoms came under Rome. And from 168 BC onwards, Syria became, but just like any other province under Rome, it still was a nation on its own, but it was now paying tribute to Rome. So the Seleucid kingdom was limited to Syria, but it was a nation now under Rome fully. Okay, and it is therefore in that year, in 168, that Rome became the superpower of the world, because even Syria was now under the dominion of Rome. That was in 168 BC. Then in 65 BC, Pompey took over the governorship of Syria. Now, indeed, Syria was just but a province of Rome. It ceased to be a nation. When Pompey took over the governorship of Syria and Syria transferred its powers to Rome, therefore, the Seleucid kingdom ceased to be the king of the north. Rome, from then onwards in 65 BC, became the king of the north. Why? They had taken over the governorship of Syria, and they were now the northern kingdom as far as Israel was concerned. But in the south, because Egypt had a relationship with Rome. Remember, Rome rescued Egypt against the king of the north. There was an agreement of some sort, and there were diplomatic relations between Egypt and Rome. Ptolemy or the Ptolemaic kingdom remained intact. So the Ptolemaic kingdom remained the king of the south, but the king of the north was now Rome. That's important. The king of the north was now Rome, but Egypt remained the king of the south, or the Ptolemaic kingdom, because the dynasty that was ruling Egypt then was the dynasty of Ptolemy, or the Ptolemaic dynasty. I hope that point is clear. All right. Then the other part of the verse says, so, but he that cometh against him, that is against the king of the north, shall do according to his own will, that is Pompey, or the kingdom of Rome, and now none shall stand before him. They took over the whole world, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. Now let's look at the last part of the verse. Ye shall stand in the glorious land. Now, something interesting happened, okay, which is called the Maccabean revolt in history. Now, what happened is in 167 BCE, remember that in 192, Rome declared war on the northern kingdom. So years later, in 167, because the northern kingdom was the overarching power. Of course, in the south, we had Ptolemy. The Jews, to avoid the northern kingdom, they went into an agreement with Rome. Back then, even before Rome was the king of the north, in 167 BC, the Jews revolted against the Seleucid Empire in an uprising known as the Maccabean revolt, because the Maccabees was leading this group of revolutionaries. We looked at that, but you can look it up in history. In 168 BCE, the Roman Republic and the Jewish state, under the leadership of Judas Maccabeus, formed a political and military alliance. Okay, that is in 161 BC. Now, this is important. Just remember this detail is going to come up again when the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11 transitions. So in Daniel chapter 11, from verses 1 to verse 30, prophecy focuses more on how the nations and the kingdoms came one after the other, and how things happened politically. Okay, and then from verses 22 onwards, it then comes back to this detail to relate the prophecy in relation to God's people, because the prophecy starts by saying, Gabriel says, I am going to give you an outline of events and what shall befall thy people in the latter days. So basically, Daniel chapter 11, Gabriel was outlining what was going to befall Daniel's people in the latter days. So in doing so, he explains the political arena from Daniel chapter 11, verse 2 onwards. Daniel chapter 11, verse 2 to chapter 22. After laying out the political arena and how things came to be, and how the king of the north and the king of the south came to be, from verse 22, 23, he comes back to history, to this incident we find in 167 BC, so that he can start to narrate or relate the prophecies in relation to God's people, because the prophecy has something to do with thy people, that is Daniel's people. So this detail is where the prophet is going to come back and pick this up again. So there was a political agreement between Rome and Judah in 160 BC. So that is why it says, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. And we shall see how all this was fulfilled later on this week, as we then are going to take it from verse 16, and then we shall see everything up to verse 45. So basically, this is the outline or a summary of what we looked at previously when we looked at this prophecy. So, but he that cometh, that is Pompey of Rome, against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. That is Antiochus the 13th, who was ruling then, who wanted to annihilate the Egyptians, or the king of the south, failed to stand against him. And in 65 BC, Pompey conquered Antiochus the 13th, and Syria lost dominion as the king of the north, and Rome became the king of the north. And then eventually there was a pact in 161 BC between Rome and Israel. And then later on in 65 BC, rather in 63 BC, we saw also in history, as we shall see, we saw that the sons of a priest were fighting against each other, as in who was going to be the next priest. And one of the sons, that is Aristobulus, when he saw that Pompey might favor his brother, he revolted against Pompey, and then Pompey marched into Judah, or into Judea, and then he fought against Aristobulus and his armies. And after fighting him, then eventually even Israel became just but a province under Rome. So that's why here it says, by which his hand shall be consumed. And even up to the New Testament times, Israel was still under the Rome of yoke since then. So this is the summary, a quick recap of what we looked at in days, so that at least you can see how we came to be where we are now. So tomorrow onwards, we're going to take it up from here, from verse 17, and then we shall see the fulfillment of the rest of the prophecies. It's a lot of detail. It needs one to go over again and again and again to grasp all the details, but it really repays those who do so, because it will really help bring to light the last prophecies, that is verse 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. And you know that these prophecies are then expounded more in Revelation, especially from from Revelation chapter 13 up to chapter 17. So I hope we're going to go over, and I hope it was not much. Don't, again, like I said previously, do not worry yourself so much about the details, as in remembering or trying to memorize all the details by head. No, 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 no. Just understand how things came to be, because you can always come back to this. You can always look up the details whenever you want them. What's important is to have an understanding or a broader overview of how things came to be. How did we come to have the king of the north and the king of the south? You may not exactly know the dates and the details, but you must be able to understand how things came to be. That way, it will be easy to understand the prophecies that we want to look at. That is verse 30 to verse 36, and then verse 40 to 45. May God bless the reading of his word. If there are any questions, please let the elder know. Give Elder Kumalo, give Elder Nankati, and then before the beginning of each session, I'll then start by answering the questions. Thank you so much. May God bless you. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.